Hello and welcome to another edition of The Big Question with me, Ian Pelham Turner, on ALB UK Television. Today my guest is the wonderful hypnotherapist from Harley Street, no less, in London. Very posh place to be, is Sandy Robson. So welcome.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
So, we're going to talk today about how women at times can feel shame, but how you can actually then help them get over that type of period in your life. So tell me, what type of experiences do you have from your patients in general about shame? What causes shame in the first place?
Shame is caused by the people that go through trauma in their lives, emotional trauma. And what happens is that shame is a core driving emotion, and it can elicit lots of different issues in our lives. For instance, you can have post-traumatic stress disorder, you can get depression, you can have anxiety, you can have really low self-esteem. I see lots of women for self-esteem issues, and these are usually fabulous women. I have the privilege of meeting so many different types of people in my practice, specifically women, and they come in, and they're quite successful or very successful. They've got good careers, they've got really generally quite good lives. But when I hear about their backstory and what's going on in their lives, I'm so surprised, that they actually managed to live a fulfilling life, but with underlying with deep-seated issues. And once I hear about that backstory and about what they've been through in their lives, I'm really, I'm just so surprised that they're actually doing as well as they're doing in spite of having such difficult circumstances.
And do you think men have the same issue? Do you think men have shame as well, of some variation?
I think so, absolutely. I mainly work with women, but I do have men that come to see me, and I think to a certain extent we've all experienced shame in our lives. We all have that little voice in the back of our heads that says, you're not good enough. We might feel flawed, defective in some way, and that creates issues in our lives. It creates a pattern in our lives that we begin to think that this is who we are. We don't realize that if we could heal those aspects of ourselves, we could literally, change our lives. Shame is such, as I said before, it's such a driving core emotion that, it can direct our lives, and we can actually call it fate. It's kind of like, own your story or it will own you, sort of thing.
So explain what a hypnotherapist is to start off with, and what type of techniques do you use to actually overcome these types of feelings, these issues?
So a hypnotherapist is somebody that works directly with the subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind processes 5 billion bits of information per second, and our conscious mind processes about 30 bits. So if you want to make changes, deep changes, you have to address that part of our inner mind where we really have, the infinite capacity to heal. So I go in there and start communicating with the subconscious mind and releasing issues, beliefs, behaviors, driving core issues from the past. Also, I do something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Bit of a mouthful, but what that is really going in and releasing core issues as well. Post-traumatic stress disorder, people that have been through emotional traumas, that gets stored in a particular part of the brain, in the amygdala part of the brain. So I go in there and start releasing those issues, those traumas. Also, I use something called the havening technique, which is a psychosensory touch technique that was created in the States by a doctor called Dr. Rudin, and he wanted to find out exactly the chemical process, what happens in the brain when we go through emotional traumas. And, you know, it gets, as I said, it gets stored in the amygdala. It's held in place by AMPA receptors. And what I do is do a technique to release delta waves into the brain, which actually releases those traumas and the associated emotions that go along with those traumas as well.
So is it a cure, or is it coming to terms with a project or a particular problem?
It is a cure. I would say it's a cure. I really believe that people have innately within them the capacity to heal themselves. You know, once they have that level of self-awareness, once they have that desire, that drive, that motivation to go forward with their lives, you know, and have that kind of, you know, that level of self-awareness to really have a life where they feel that there is the capacity and the potential, you know, to live differently. Because I think, you know, when we have these core issues, they can literally drive your life to a certain extent that you kind of, you know, you hang out in the shadowlands, what I call the shadowlands of despair, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, you know, all sorts, you know, pessimism, boredom, just quite a joyless existence, you know. And where you've got that hopelessness, above that you've got hope. And then you can, once you start releasing all of those core, difficult, challenging emotions, you can start getting hope, going into joy, appreciation, having more joyful experiences in your life. And when you talk about sort of, you know, like the law of attraction, for instance, you can't attract good things into your life if you're living out in pessimism and despair. You block, you know, you do, you block it. All right, we could have our conscious mind come in and you know, think positive thoughts and do all of that stuff, you know, kind of do some work in that direction. But when it comes to, you know, doing the core healing and pulling things out of the roots and really kind of like, you know, shaking the earth off and just discarding it and you know, really wanting to move forward and start attracting new positive experiences, new relationships, new excitement, new possibilities. That happens by doing core release work, in my opinion, you know, and that's why I love what I do.
And do you find that shame initiates perhaps in childhood? And do you think that people block these experiences out at times, and they don't even know why? They may be very successful, but they feel they're not successful, or they feel as if something is missing in their lives?
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of these issues, they start in childhood. We live 95% of our lives driven by subconscious downloads that we receive before the age of 7. So whatever you've got going on, you know, from that part of your life, you know, the beliefs that you've downloaded from your caregivers and your parents and your environment, and what, you know, if you're one of the unlucky ones and then you've had a really traumatic childhood, that becomes a default driving subconscious program. So you can go out into the world and you can do, you know, accomplish so much, but maybe the way that you feel about yourself, your ability to love yourself, to you know, have self-worth and self-respect and all that comes from a deeper part, you know. And all right, we can have all the success in the world, but if you don't like who you are when you close the door at night and you're home alone and you're sitting there thinking, you know, I'm so unhappy and so you know, desperate for maybe a good relationship, for instance. Maybe there are other aspects of your life that are not working, you know. But it's true, really. It's the relationship we have with ourselves, and our ability to love ourselves is really how you start to, you know, create a life, a very deeply nourishing life for yourself, really.
So when you're first starting to talk to someone and they're under hypnosis in the first place, how do you know which area to go to, which memory it might be that is causing the problem?
The subconscious lets me know.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, but when I first have the initial consultation with somebody, I spend a lot of time asking questions.
Under hypnosis?
No, when they're completely conscious, and then I get an idea of what's going on and the best way to proceed forward with that individual. But usually they've got a pretty good idea of what went on in their childhood. I mean, some people, they've blocked a lot of things out, but as we go through the process and I start to do some trauma release work, that things come up and they say to me all of a sudden, I haven't thought about that in years, or I forgot all about that, or whatever, So, but generally the person will come to me when they're ready to heal. And then as we go through that journey, as we go through that process, they will, their subconscious mind will start to bring up things,
Do they find it traumatic going through? Do you find that, they become tearful? Are they reliving these traumatic moments in their lives, do you think?
They get to experience some of the emotions that they had back then, but I don't encourage them to go back into the trauma. When people come to see me, I want them to feel safe. So we spend the first session or 2 sessions creating safety for that person. And then, no, but in answer to your question, they don't have to relive the trauma. They just have to have an idea of what it was, and then we can just process the emotions quite quickly, effectively, and safely, so they don't get re-traumatized.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You don't think they will have flashbacks? I remember, because I know we've talked and we're great friends as well. And I've talked about 2 childhood experiences that one was not having enough money, and the second one was being on my own. And they were from really experiences I had as a child. I had a great childhood, great family environment, but they were 2 traumatic times in my life that it's only when I came back and started realizing, why was I feeling like this, that these actual flashbacks came back into my head again. So I just wonder at times whether, when you're dealing with sort of things like this, you have to be so careful. As you say, you have to create safety for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes flashbacks are a part of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're, that's your subconscious letting you know that there is something that you're rechurning over and over and over again, in your present experience. And it's, it's a good indication that it's time now to go back and to heal that, release it, and have some freedom. Because I think people, when they've been through difficult situations in their lives and had traumatic experiences, they believe it's set in stone. They believe that there's no way to heal. It's like when I hear about people on the news, that've been through wars, and they kind of, they have the PTSD, and they're so traumatized, they think that this is it. That's how they're always going to have the flashbacks, they're always going to have the nightmares, always going to have the anxiety. But actually, it's because those traumas are stuck in that part, the amygdala part of the brain, and held in place. But once we release those, it's like night and day. They suddenly are free of that, and it's wonderful to see. And I just feel so happy for people when they get to that place.
I can imagine. Does it take a long time to actually, is it months working with you to actually release this? Or what do you?
It depends, really. I mean, sometimes it can, be up to 6 months, maybe seeing somebody every 2 weeks. Or it could be that, we do 3 sessions together and that person feels that they're not getting the symptoms anymore. Yeah. They're not getting, the flashbacks or the nightmares, or they're not anxious anymore, they're not depressed anymore. these low vibration emotions, they are an energy, and once you start to release that energy, then they suddenly feel, you know, lighter and brighter and more peaceful, and you know, but it really depends on the individual.
And that's how we want people in Britain to be. We
Absolutely.
want everyone happy and
Yes,
positive.
yes, yes.
So that's why we started Positive Britain, our new project on ALB UK TV as well. So finally, how can people get in contact with you?
They can get in contact with me through my website,
Which is what?
sandyrobsonhypnotherapy.co.uk.
Right. Okay. And you're obviously, they make appointments, and then it's a continuous effort on both your parts after that.
Yes.
How do you know when they're cured?
How do I know when they're cured? They don't have the symptoms anymore. They feel a lot more, as you're saying, you know, they feel a lot more positive. They have a sense of freedom. They open up to new possibilities in their lives. They're able to form better relationships with people, better relationships with themselves. And, you know, they're just not having those awful symptoms, you know, like of depression, or, you know, the symptoms that you get from post-traumatic stress disorder. And yeah, I mean, it's quite miraculous to see sometimes how people can change.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's very satisfying as a therapist to see that.
I'm sure it is. And this, ladies and gentlemen, she's a wonderful person in her own right as well. You know, you're writing a book about your life at the moment, and that's very, very interesting at the same time. So Sandy, thank you so much for appearing on My Big Question again. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. We'll ask you some more questions, no doubt.
Thank you.
So from me, Ian Pelham Turner on ALB UK TV, My Big Question, and with Sandy Robson this time, it's goodbye for now.